On July 12, 2014, at the Hiroshima police station in Japan, a girl walked in holding her mother's hand tightly. Outwardly, she looked no different from an ordinary high school student, but the words she spoke sent chills down everyone's spine. "I killed someone." The girl who confessed was 17-year-old Miki Nomura. The victim she admitted to killing was also a teenage girl of the same age named Erika Kurose. Police were bewildered by this unexpected confession and asked why she had killed her friend. Miki answered matter-of-factly, "She kept cursing at me in the chat room." You killed someone just because of an online argument. The police couldn't believe this naively horrifying response. The female student's confession seemed vague, but when police continued asking about the whereabouts of the body, Miki's expression suddenly became serious. She tensely confessed that she had dumped the body at Mount Hyo-jin, a remote area about 12.4 miles from downtown Hiroshima, a desolate place with no one around. Police began to suspect this might just be a prank. However, there was one detail that concerned them. The location Miki mentioned, Mount Hyo-jin, was very difficult to access without transportation, and even with a car, it would take 40 to 50 minutes to reach. Meanwhile, Miki was only 16 years old, not old enough to drive. When police asked how she could have gotten to such a remote place, Miki replied that she had taken a taxi with the victim. Seeing the police still looked skeptical, she affirmed once more with a decisive tone, "I really did kill her." The next day, July 13th, based on Miki's testimony, the police team began searching and actually discovered a body beneath the cliff of Mount Hyo-jin. The body was in severe decomposition, appearing to have been dead for quite some time, with broken bones throughout as if it had fallen from a great height. After conducting an autopsy, the identity was confirmed to be Erika, the girl who had mysteriously disappeared. Police intended to arrest Miki on murder charges, but still had doubts because this could have been just an accident of falling off the cliff. For this reason, they decided to arrest her on charges of disposing of a body rather than direct murder. What made it difficult for police to believe was that a 17-year-old girl could independently carry out a criminal act at such a treacherous location, a place inaccessible without transportation. From this, they began to suspect the existence of accomplices. To track down the conspirators, police examined Miki's phone. Through analyzing the messages, they identified suspicious individuals who had conversations related to the case. This number reached 6 people. On July 17th, during the investigation, an unexpected development occurred. 3 of the 6 people who appeared in the messages voluntarily came to the police station. They were 17-year-old Ayano, 17-year-old Daisuke, and 16-year-old Tachiya. They cautiously spoke up. "We were also involved in Erika's case." After cross-referencing the testimonies of these 3 teenagers with Miki's previous messages, police were completely certain they were connected to the case. Thus, a total of 4 people, including Miki, were all arrested on charges of disposing of a body and murder. Based on the testimonies obtained, police continued to arrest 3 more people: 21-year-old Odai, 17-year-old Nana, and 16-year-old Hazuki. What was notable was that among the 7 people arrested, 4 people, including Miki, Ayano, Daisuke, and Tachiya, all lived together as runaways. Miki and Daisuke, Ayano, and Tachiya formed 2 couples. All came from broken, unfortunate families. In these difficult circumstances, they relied on each other and made a living through jobs like truck driving or prostitution. What was surprising was that their income was not small at all. They could even earn several 100,000 yen per month. Because of this group had become famous in the area because these kids always went around together and spent money lavishly. The other 3 people also maintained close relationships with this family. Odai, the only adult, knew the boys through truck driving work and served as transportation for the family that didn't have their own vehicle. As for Nana and Hazuki, although they didn't live together, they were also delinquent teenagers who had gone astray. So how was the victim Erika connected to them? It turned out Erika was attending the same school as Miki, the first person to confess. The 2 girls became close because they both had unfortunate family circumstances. Later, at Miki's invitation, Erika joined a chat room and naturally began to have relationships with people in this chat room. Initially, the two were bonded like true friends, but from a certain point, their relationship began to show cracks. The members of this chat group all considered each other like blood relatives. However, there still existed hierarchies and underlying tensions within. Among them, Miki played the role of leader. She always wanted to become the central figure of the group, but gradually realized that Erika was getting more attention than herself. From then on, she began to feel insecure and fell into a psychological crisis. On the night of June 27th, 4 members of this chat group were gathering at a karaoke bar in downtown Hiroshima. While singing happily, Miki continuously checked the chat room. This chat room was a public chat that included men wanting to buy sex and teenage girls. Members also often exchanged work through this chat room, and Erika had just recently started operating after being introduced by Miki. That day, Erika was chatting very intimately with a strange man. Miki became increasingly uncomfortable seeing this scene. Why am I the one who invited her to the chat room, but she's stealing the spotlight? The feeling of jealousy grew higher and higher, and finally she couldn't contain it anymore and interjected into the conversation. It's best not to get involved with Erika. Everyone knows what kind of person she is. This comment made the atmosphere in the chat room suddenly turn cold. At this point, Erika couldn't stand it anymore and retorted, "What are you saying? You only talk about money all the time. It's really exhausting." This small argument gradually escalated uncontrollably. After that, both exploded emotionally, with crude words exchanged back and forth. "I'll kill you. I'll bury you." Such statements made the atmosphere reach peak tension. Miki was so angry she lost her mind, breathing heavily non-stop. The chat group members who were playing together immediately asked what had happened. At this point, she recounted everything that had just occurred in the chat room. After hearing this, all members showed indignation. How dare they mess with our leader? We need to teach her a thorough lesson. They began discussing plans and asked Nana to contact Erika to secretly call her out to an empty lot in the area. Nana, along with another accomplice, Hazuki, sent private messages to Erika. The chat room incident earlier was a bit sad, wasn't it? Come out and talk with me for a bit. Hazuki will be there too. It was already past 3 a.m. After the argument in the chat room, Erika didn't want to be alone, and she usually had a good relationship with Nana and Hazuki, so even though it was very late, she didn't suspect anything and immediately agreed to come out. At 4 a.m., all 3 met at an empty lot on the outskirts of Hiroshima. Just as Erika cheerfully greeted the two, a car appeared from behind, and chat group members jumped out of the vehicle. They forced Erika into the car, then brutally slammed the car door shut. Erika looked around and saw herself surrounded by members on all sides. Sensing the cold, dangerous atmosphere, she instinctively screamed for help, but her cries were immediately muffled by someone. The car carrying Erika sped away and soon entered the highway, reaching a toll booth. Although there were staff stationed at the toll booth, Erika thought this was her last chance and desperately screamed, "Please save me! Please help me!" But the loud music drowned out her cries, and no one could hear. Seeing her call for help, the members became even more enraged. They took a towel from the back seat and stuffed it into Erika's mouth. In extreme fear, with her mouth gagged with the towel, Erika could hardly maintain her composure. But the members' fury had not subsided at all. Now began the cruel torture without reason. Unprovoked punches and kicks targeted her entire body. Erika continuously lost consciousness and regained it, gradually becoming exhausted and losing the ability to resist. At this point, Miki was quietly observing, then took something from her bag. It was a box cutter. She silently approached Erika and began stabbing the knife into her stomach. Although Erika screamed in horrific pain, no one stopped Miki. The surrounding members calmly watched this scene, with some even laughing as if they found it amusing. Just because of an argument in a chat room, it had led to something so horrific. In this chaotic situation, the car still didn't stop and plunged deep into Mount Hyo-jin. When they reached the middle of the mountain, the car stopped, and they dragged Erika, who was now nearly unconscious, out of the car and threw her to the ground. She was covered in blood all over her body and couldn't move normally, but the horrific torture still hadn't stopped. At this point, Miki's boyfriend Daisuke began to act. He approached Erika from behind, wrapped his hands around her neck, and began to squeeze tightly. Soon after, he felt Erika's neck bones being crushed. She was dead. Afterward, the members didn't hesitate to throw the body off the cliff. They thought all their crimes would be covered up, and they all returned home as if nothing had happened. So why did Miki suddenly confess? Actually, that night, she didn't think much about it. But as days passed, the feeling of guilt grew stronger. Although she outwardly pretended to be normal, every night she feared Erika's ghost would come for her, often mumbling to herself and crying for no clear reason, appearing very unstable. With this unrelenting anxious mood, she personally went to Mount Hyo-jin, the place where they had dumped the body, to check. There, she witnessed Erika still abandoned beneath the cliff. It was July. Summer. Japanese summers are extremely hot and humid. In this burning heat, the body had severely decomposed, with limbs broken in grotesque ways from the impact of falling. Moreover, the entire body was covered with maggots and insects. Seeing the body in such a pitiful state, Miki was indescribably shocked and felt deep guilt. Finally, that night she revealed the entire truth to her mother, and the next day went to the police station to confess. But there was still one more puzzling thing here. Why did Miki initially insist this was a crime she committed alone? This question was answered more easily than expected. For her, the existence of this family was extremely precious. Growing up with domestic violence and abandonment, these members were her real family instead. To protect them, she wanted to bear all the guilt alone. But in the end, it was precisely because of such deep bonding relationships that everyone had to pay the price for their actions. Police prosecuted Odai, the only adult, on charges of robbery resulting in death, confinement, disposing of a body, and theft. The remaining 6 were minors, so they were tried in family court for juveniles. Family court is where issues like crimes committed by minors or domestic violence and divorce occurring within families are handled. In juvenile trials, even when receiving the maximum sentence, they are only sent to reform school. But if the juvenile offender's age is close to 20, or the criminal content is extremely brutal, they may be transferred to criminal trial. So what happened to the remaining 6 family members? Nana and Hazuki had lured Erika out, but didn't directly participate in the torture, so they were sent to intermediate reform school. The other members were also sent to intermediate reform school because they didn't actively participate in the crime. Fortunately, Miki, the main perpetrator, and Daisuke, who directly killed Erika, were prosecuted and received criminal trials. On October 24, 2014, Miki's criminal trial began. She claimed that she actually wanted to forgive and release Erika halfway through, but was afraid that if she stopped, she would be abandoned by her family, so she didn't dare to do so. In other words, there was no intent to kill. The court naturally did not accept this defense. The court understood that Miki had grown up in an unfortunate family environment, and because she was obsessed with her family, she couldn't stop the criminal behavior, but this couldn't become a reason for sentence reduction. As a result, Odai, the only adult, was sentenced to 13 years in prison. Daisuke, who directly strangled Erika to death, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Finally, Miki was sentenced to 13 years in prison. All 3 appealed, but were all rejected. The perpetrators in this case said they themselves didn't know how it had come to this. But what was certain was that human life couldn't be taken lightly with the phrase, "I don't know how it happened." And the members of this family realized this far too late. On April 24, 2013, at 5 a.m. in the pre-dawn darkness, a shocking emergency call was made to the 119 emergency line in Gohung County, Jeollanam Province. "Someone just fell off the bridge. My younger sister was taking photos when she fell. Please come to the scene quickly." The caller was Mrs. Kim, a 40-year-old woman. Her report stated that someone in their group had fallen from the bridge while taking photos. At that time, the 119 emergency operator continuously asked, "Ma'am, where exactly did the accident occur? Where did this happen?" but Mrs. Kim was in such a state of panic that she couldn't answer clearly. Fortunately, another woman standing nearby intervened to explain the location. The accident site was the Naro Bridge, the bridge leading to Naro Island in Gohung County, Jeollanam Province. The 119th Rescue Team quickly departed, but on their way to the scene, they were consumed with anxious thoughts. If it was that bridge, the height from the bridge deck to the bottom was about 65 feet, equivalent to a 6-story apartment building. Falling from this height would certainly cause fatal injuries. Not only would limbs be broken, but if someone fell head first, death could be instantaneous. Additionally, internal organ damage and spinal fractures were very common. Even if someone miraculously survived, could they endure the cold for an extended period? Moreover, the waters near Naro Bridge had quite strong currents. Although the rescue team would quickly arrive at the scene, in that brief time, the victim could have already drifted away or sunk to the bottom. The rescue team felt restless and anxious and soon arrived at the scene. Just as they had initially feared, there was no sign of the person needing rescue. Only a lone sneaker remained on one side of the bridge. She might have drifted away or sunk to the ocean floor. Immediately after, everything from patrol boats to divers was mobilized to conduct a wide-area search. Due to the strong current, the search area was significantly expanded. The search continued throughout the entire day, but unfortunately yielded no results. Meanwhile, the reporter Mrs. Kim, 41, and her companion Mrs. Seo, 43, were anxiously monitoring the search. Their panicked expressions were very clear. Police asked them many detailed questions to understand how the accident had occurred. Who was the victim? What was their relationship with them? And why were all three present at the bridge so early in the morning? First, the person who fell was Ms. Choi Hyo-jin, 31 years old. Compared to the group of friends in their 40s, she was about 10 years younger, like a close sisterly relationship. All three lived in Gwangyang, Jeollanam Province, and regularly met for dinner or drinks. On the evening of the 23rd, around 7:30 p.m., Ms. Kim had called, "Hyo-jin, let's go eat," and suggested having dinner together. Since Hyo-jin had no plans, she happily agreed. When they arrived at the pre-arranged restaurant, Ms. Seo, another close friend, was already there. That day, the three ate together and drank rice wine. The drinking atmosphere became lively, and time had passed to 10 p.m. At this point, Mrs. Kim suggested, "Going home like this would be boring. There's a nice place near Gohung Naro. Let's go there to drink more and have fun." Although sudden, everyone enthusiastically agreed. Thus, all three arrived at a motel on Naro Island after midnight. They bought alcohol from a nearby convenience store and brought it back to their room. The entire group continued drinking and chatting vibrantly until 4:30 a.m. Initially planning to return home in the morning, all three were heavily intoxicated, their faces flushed red from alcohol. At this point, someone suggested, "Let's go outside and breathe some fresh air." The three left the motel and walked to the nearby Naro Bridge. The cool sea breeze helped them sober up faster. When they reached the middle of the bridge span, Hyo-jin enthusiastically said, "Sister, let's take a commemorative selfie," and suggested taking photos. Still in an intoxicated state, she staggered toward the bridge railing. "I'm taking the photo now, are you ready?" But at that exact moment, a sudden strong wind struck. Hyo-jin lost her balance and fell straight down below the bridge. Witnessing this horrific scene, Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo were extremely shocked, unable to contain their panicked screams. Mrs. Kim tried to regain her composure and immediately called 119 for emergency help. It was truly an accident that occurred too suddenly and unexpectedly. However, upon hearing this testimony, police felt there were unusual points. Around 5 a.m. when the accident occurred, it was still not completely light, and the atmosphere remained dark. Even nearby objects were difficult to identify clearly. In fact, in the photos Hyo-jin had taken, only the dim light of street lamps could be seen. Moreover, this was not a famous location or a familiar tourist destination. It also wasn't a place with special scenery worth photographing for memories. Of course, the three might have wanted to create their own personal, memorable moments. Next, police went to check the motel where all three claimed they had stayed overnight. In the room were empty alcohol bottles along with Hyo-jin's hair tie. It seemed they had indeed stayed there overnight. However, something created a strange feeling. The empty bottles and paper cups were arranged neatly, too orderly. This gave the impression that the scene had been deliberately staged, creating an inexplicable discomfort. Based on these suspicions, police decided to separate Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo to question them in detail about the actual situation at that time. If this was truly an accident, the testimonies of both women should have similar points. First, Mrs. Seo testified that Hyo-jin had staggered toward the railing and in a split second had fallen below the bridge. Conversely, Mrs. Kim appeared vague, saying she didn't remember the details very well. She explained that because everything happened so quickly combined with being drunk, her memory seemed hazy. But memories of that moment were extremely important. That was precisely when the accident occurred. Yet police didn't see any minimal effort from Mrs. Kim to try to recall. Police intuition told them she was hiding something. However, this was still just an intuitive feeling. First, they needed to learn about Ms. Choi Hyo-jin. She had divorced her husband a year earlier and was currently living alone. Her current job was as a cashier at a supermarket with quite limited income. To cover living expenses, she was forced to borrow money from banks and lending companies. Due to extremely high interest rates, her debt snowballed, ultimately reaching nearly 70 million won. When police conducted deeper investigation, they discovered that in such difficult financial circumstances, Hyo-jin had taken out 4 life insurance policies within the past year. This raised the question, how could someone who had no money for living expenses and had to borrow have sufficient ability to pay insurance premiums? Could this not be her own money? Police proceeded to check the insurance premium payment history, and their prediction was accurate. In reality, the insurance payment money didn't come from Hyo-jin's account at all, but from the account of a 34-year-old man named Shin. And this person was running a loan shark business in Suncheon City. When examining the records further, there was one notable detail. Exactly 3 months earlier, Hyo-jin's insurance beneficiary had been changed to Mr. Shin. In fact, the insurance company's security cameras had recorded Hyo-jin coming directly and signing the relevant documents. Therefore, procedurally, there were no problems whatsoever. However, the final results showed that when Hyo-jin went missing, the person who would benefit the most was Mr. Shin. Police cautiously summoned him and asked about this insurance relationship. Mr. Shin replied, "If my girlfriend doesn't have money, I can pay the insurance premiums." "What's the problem?" "The insurance beneficiary became me because she has no family, that's all." This meant the two had a romantic relationship, and he naturally wanted to help, so he acted accordingly. But there were still suspicious elements. This person was a loan shark creditor, and Hyo-jin had many debts. Anyway, the fact that the two were dating was real. There would certainly be suspicious points. Police conducted investigations in various directions and finally found the crucial clue. A few days before Hyo-jin went missing, a Kurose vehicle had appeared multiple times near Naro Bridge on security cameras. When police wondered, what is this Kurose that appears so frequently, and proceeded to check the license plate, the owner was surprisingly Mr. Shin. Of course, this wasn't direct evidence of murder. However, it could be considered that he had conducted site reconnaissance before execution. But one important detail shouldn't be forgotten. When the incident occurred, the people present at the same time were Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo. Consider this. Loan shark creditor Shin could receive 430 million won in insurance money when Hyo-jin died. If he disguised everything as an accident to obtain that insurance money, having witnesses like these women would make everything much more favorable. However, there was still a part that hadn't been clearly resolved. Usually these women had close relationships with Hyo-jin. So what reason would cause these women to become accomplices in the crime? Could there be some relationship we didn't know about? Police focused on digging deeper into the relationship between these 3 people. Finally, they clarified the crucial connecting point. It turned out both Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo had borrowed tens of millions of won from loan shark creditor Shin. When investigating deeper, these 3 people had many meetings before the incident occurred. Security cameras had recorded them dining together at restaurants, and restaurant owners also testified they remembered them. This meant these three people might have formed a faction. Shin, the person who would benefit most from Hyo-jin's death, had offered some condition to the women who owed him money to draw them into the incident. That condition was very likely debt reduction. With this hypothesis, police proceeded to track the phone locations of all three people to see how they moved on the day the incident occurred. They also questioned transportation and pedestrians present around the area when the accident happened. They hoped to find some crucial clue that could support the hypothesis police had constructed. However, after nearly a month of meticulous investigation, they discovered no suspicious points. Although police intuition suggested Shin was the perpetrator, there was no concrete evidence. Not to mention murder, there wasn't even evidence showing he was connected to the bridge accident. Moreover, the body hadn't been found yet. In this situation, Shin made an unexpected move. He went directly to the Coast Guard station and requested to see the investigation files about his girlfriend. The reason given was that it was necessary to file an insurance compensation claim, but if he was the perpetrator, his real intention might have been to confirm how much the police had discovered. Police refused, saying, "Currently, disclosing information seems difficult." Shin even hired a lawyer and filed a complaint. These were very bold and brazen actions, as if challenging and mocking the police investigation. Nearly 2 months passed. The case still had no significant progress, but on June 7th, an incredible miracle occurred. Around 3 p.m. in Yeosu, Jeollanam Province, a severely decomposed female body was discovered in the rocks at Baekje Bridge, Hwajung District. After identifying the body, it was indeed Hyo-jin. Finally, police could see a small ray of hope, because now they could confirm whether she had truly had an accident or not. The autopsy results showed the cause of death was suffocation from strangulation and intentional murder. Moreover, from discovering this body, it became undeniably clear this was a murder case. Why? Because the body was carefully wrapped in curtain fabric and tightly bound with blue wire mesh. Not only that, to prevent it from floating to the surface, 2 construction bricks had been tied tightly to the body with rope. This was definitely an intentional murder. However, there was one more point of doubt that needed clarification. Why was Hyo-jin, who was supposedly to have fallen from Naro Bridge in Gohyung, discovered at distant Baekje Bridge in Yeosu? These 2 bridges were 28 miles apart. One might think the body had drifted with the current, but in reality, the current from Baekje Bridge in Yeosu actually flows toward Naro Bridge in Gohyung. Therefore, the hypothesis of drifting with the current was completely unreasonable. At this point, police suddenly realized the truth. From the beginning, everything had been a lie. The actual location where the murder occurred was not Naro Bridge, but had been Baekje Bridge from the start. What did this mean? Throughout this time, police had only believed the report and focused their search in the Gohyung Bridge area so they couldn't find the body. Thus, each clue was gradually resolved. Having found the body, police urgently arrested all 3 people, the 2 women Kim and Seo, along with the main perpetrator Shin, on charges of murder and body disposal. Shin said, "Ah, terrible," and complied with the arrest. But Kim and Seo strongly denied the murder conspiracy. "We don't know anything about murder. Giving Hyo-jin sleeping pills was true, but after that we just handed her over to Shin." "Ah, you gave her sleeping pills." But were these 2 really telling the truth? Right then, police comfortably smiled and showed the 2 women a video. Seeing it, Kim and Seo became silent. It was security camera footage from the day of the incident, showing the 2 getting into Shin's Corando and stopping at Baekje Bridge. Thus, their complicity was completely exposed. Fortunately, Shin also confessed, so the charges against the 2 women were clarified. So what actually happened that day? At the end of 2012, Hyo-jin first met loan shark creditor Shin through Ms. Seo's introduction. At that time, she had recently divorced her husband and was living alone. Financial hardship made her struggle through each day, so both mentally and economically she was in a state of exhaustion. Shin had targeted this weakness precisely. Every time he met Hyo-jin, he spent generously to win her affection. The two quickly became close and soon became lovers. Actually, all of this was part of the evil plan Shin had laid out. In fact, for some time before, he had been actively seeking a woman living alone with no family to rely on, because he wanted to execute an insurance fraud scheme through this woman. During this time, Seo had informed him that among the people she knew, there was Hyo-jin, who had just gone through divorce and was in debt. Shin immediately said, "Sister, then introduce me to that divorced woman." After meeting, he began approaching Hyo-jin purposefully. After becoming lovers, he began revealing his true nature. Shin told Hyo-jin, "You're in a lot of debt, aren't you? There's a very easy way to pay off all that debt," and proposed insurance fraud. The plan was to buy as many life insurance policies as possible under Hyo-jin's name, then report a fake disappearance. Hyo-jin had also agreed because living alone was too difficult, making her tempted by the promise of earning a lot of money. Thus, they enrolled in 4 life insurance contracts. However, when everything was proceeding according to plan, an unexpected obstacle appeared. Seo discovered their criminal plan and demanded to participate. At this point, main perpetrator Shin thought that when reporting Hyo-jin's fake disappearance, having a third-party witness would make everything smoother. Therefore, he drew Seo into the scheme, establishing a 3-person insurance fraud gang: Shin, Seo, and Hyo-jin. According to the agreement, when they got the insurance money, Hyo-jin herself would receive 50%, while Shin and Seo would each get 25%. But gradually, Shin began feeling dissatisfied. Although he was the one who planned it, the money coming to him was too little. Why should Hyo-jin get the largest share? He began thinking, "I'd rather kill her outright and monopolize all that money myself." Once he had this intention, he secretly discussed it with Seo. Being in debt to Shin, Seo agreed to disguise killing Hyo-jin as an accident in exchange for having all her debt erased. And here, they also drew in Kim, another acquaintance. Thus, Kim and Seo deliberately became close to Hyo-jin. At the same time, this was when the membership of the 3-person fraud gang began to change. On April 23rd, the 2 women called Hyo-jin to the restaurant. While happily eating and drinking together, when Hyo-jin went to the bathroom, they secretly put sleeping pills in the rice wine she was drinking. Hyo-jin continued drinking without any suspicion, and soon after her vision began to blur and she fell into unconsciousness. At 10:15 p.m., Shin, who had been waiting near the restaurant, arrived, and all 3 pretended to help Hyo-jin into the car as if she was just drunk. And right there, the 3 committed the brutal crime. At this point, Hyo-jin was in a completely immobile state. They placed a plastic bag over her face, intending to suffocate her. They had planned murder from the beginning, but because it was their first time, it wasn't like in movies. She didn't die immediately. They panicked and immediately changed methods, using cable ties they had prepared to strangle her neck. Hyo-jin couldn't resist and soon stopped breathing. Afterward, they used curtain fabric they had prepared to wrap the body and tied it tightly with wire mesh. They moved the body into the car trunk and drove around Yosu looking for a deserted place with no passers-by. Around 2:30 a.m. on the 24th, they parked at Baekya Island Pier in Yosu. Since it wasn't yet time for fishermen to go out to sea, this area was very deserted and quiet. Moreover, there were no streetlights, so the atmosphere was very dark. They hung 2 bricks on the body and threw it straight into the sea. But they didn't stop there. Now they had to create an alibi. Therefore, they drove toward Gohung intending to pretend that 3 women had naturally traveled to Naro. Anticipating the police investigation would come, they deliberately chose accommodation without security cameras. They arranged empty bottles and cups in the room as if they had drunk a lot of alcohol. Finally, they deliberately left Hyo-jin's hair tie as evidence. Not only that, Kim and Seo also naturally left one of Hyo-jin's sneakers on Naro Bridge, completely staging the bridge fall situation. And soon after, with the attitude of, "Wait, let's act a bit scared," they began their performance and proceeded to make the report. At this time, Seo stood beside giving detailed instructions so Kim wouldn't make any mistakes. Truly spine-chilling. Thus, the entire incident was completely clarified. All three were prosecuted. Previously, Shin had confessed to police, but when appearing in court, he denied the charges. He presented the absurd argument that although he had strangled and thrown her into the sea, he didn't know this would lead to death. Because of such brazen attitude, even the courtroom audience couldn't contain their sighs and angry outcries. The results were announced. The trial court sentenced Shin to 30 years in prison, while Seo and Kim each received 20 years. However, the prosecution objected that this was such a thoroughly planned crime, yet the punishment was too light and immediately appealed. Going through appeals and retrials, finally in September 2014, the Supreme Court declared that the truth about complicity in this case had been fully proven. The court sentenced Shin to life imprisonment. However, Seo and Kim were considered for mitigation due to difficult economic circumstances, being tormented by debt, and being enticed and drawn in by Shin. That is, the court considered there was coercion and compulsion from Shin's side in this case. Moreover, these two were evaluated as showing some remorse, so they were reduced to 15 years in prison compared to the original trial sentence. And those are today's two cases. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next videos.